Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the PsyFi series, discovering the cutting-edge science and research in psychedelic medicine.
Welcome to the PsyFi podcast. I'm your host, Gaurav Dubey. In this podcast series, I'll be speaking with leading researchers, clinicians, and industry experts to unravel the mystery of psychedelic science. In this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with MagicMed Industries CEO, Dr. Joseph Tucker. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is really exciting. It's our first episode of PsyFi, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about you and the exciting work MagicMed Industries is doing in the psychedelic space. So did you want to just introduce yourself and share a little bit about that?
Sure. Why don't I just start by just introducing myself. So I'm a scientist who, by training, who came to the dark side business quite some time ago. In fact, got a Ph.D. about 20 years ago in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, but for the longest time have been in industry, and my whole career has been about developing new drugs, and the majority of the work that I've been involved in all has to do with brain health and mental health. So some of my earliest companies were working on stem cells, who were actually developing replacement stem cells for your brain tissue after you'd suffered, say, a stroke or traumatic brain injury. And since then, I've worked in, again, most of the time I've been a CEO or some other senior executive in the company. So also worked in companies developing drugs for schizophrenia or MS. So quite a lot of brain health has been my concern for, the last 20 years of my professional life. And it's always been around new and exciting technologies. I love working with startups. I love working with scientists who are creating new therapies, new solutions to brain and mental health issues, and helping those scientists. My role in this whole industry has always been, there's these fantastic new scientists coming up with great new things, but boy, you can't let them out into the real world, right? They'll run into a businessman and they'll kill each other. So my career has really always been about bridging that. I understand what the scientists are doing, and I totally get it, the value, but I can also communicate with the business world, and we can create companies around that, finance those things, and develop those technologies forward. And so that's been my whole career. The last 7 years has been really exciting. I've been partnered up with Dr. Peter Facchini out of the University of Calgary, who is really a absolutely world-renowned expert in the area of understanding how plants develop these molecules, which are drugs that people use as drugs, figuring out how is it that plants make those things. And, once you understand that, what can we do with that? Can we improve those molecules? Can we take the production system out of the plant and put it into something which is more amenable to pharmaceuticalization or the industry? Can you make these drugs better? Can you make them cheaper? Can you make them safer? And the fun thing working with Dr. Facchini for the last 7 years has been he's it's kind of an oxymoron, a fearless scientist. He loves to do the stuff that everyone else says, oh, that's kind of taboo, but he is absolutely unafraid. So, the first program we worked on was in opiates and understanding the opium poppy, and his, right, he's one of the few scientists in Canada at a major university who's got a license to make and grow and sell opiates. And, he's done similar work in ephedra, in cannabinoids. And so we've had a great journey the last 7 years. And that's actually how we got to where we are now. Now we're working on these new molecules, very exciting pharmaceutical molecules that, again, come from nature, right? And so I love to work with Dr. Facchini because, nobody knows how to figure out what nature is doing, and then, what can we do with that? How can we make that even better? Anyway, that's a little bit of my background.
Oh, that's really fascinating. I can relate in some ways. I'm a clinical biologist as well, and it's been really interesting bridging, trying to establish that bridge in science and media. That's kind of my wheelhouse, is taking my experience, and then I'm fortunate enough to be able to connect with people like you, and then take all of this nerdy discussion and try to frame it in a way that's digestible and appealing to our audience. So that's really exciting. I know that you're doing some really cool work at MagicMed Industries, and you talked about your prior work in cannabinoids and opiates, and now psychedelic medicine is really in this renaissance right now. So if you could tell us a little bit about the drug development process. I know you guys are working on making derivative compounds there. So I think just a brief snapshot of what's going on at MagicMed would be a great place to kick off this conversation.
Sure, thank you. And our experience really has helped shape what we're doing at MagicMed. It's those years that we spent partnered with big biotechs and big pharma, working on production systems, transferring production systems, and also recognizing, the value of new molecules and the opportunity that new tools give you to create new molecules. And so all of that kind of experience over the last few years has led us to what we're doing now. So, what we're doing now is we're taking, and I think this part is probably the most sort of creative and exciting part of all of this, is we're combining two different, areas of science that often are not combined. And so one of them is, we use this term synthetic biology, which is really a grand term that means a million different things. People use it to mean all kinds of things. And in this context, we're doing maybe what you might want to call biocatalysis, might be a better term for it. And what that means is we're going to plants and mushrooms and other natural organisms that make these really cool molecules that we call psychedelics. And we're going and saying, so how do these guys make them? What is it they're doing? What are the enzymes that they use? And we say, that enzyme's really neat. Let's take that one. Or sometimes what we're doing, and this is actually where it gets really cool, is we're now doing creative stuff. So let's say we're working on a molecule like psilocybin that comes from the mushroom. And instead of going to the mushroom to get the molecule, we've got those already, the enzymes. We say, I wonder what the marine creatures do when they see a molecule like this. Right? I wonder what these strange fruit trees in South America do when they see a molecule like this, is they have their own variations on it. And so we go and we find those enzymes and we mix those with the molecule and we create stuff. We start by creating stuff that hasn't been created before by nature or by man. And then we combine that with chemistry, where chemistry is a really great tool. It's very often used in an industrial setting. It's very effective for a lot of things, but it has its limitations. So when you combine this bioconversion, the synthetic biology, with a chemistry step, you get kind of the best of both worlds. You can make new things. You can make them in large quantity. You can make them very pure. And that, for us, this long-winded description is really my way of saying we do something very simple. We do a 1-2 step, and we make this large number of new molecules. And that's something we learned, historically, is that, like the opium poppy makes morphine. And that's, a very small part of the analgesic industry that comes from opiates. The vast majority of the industry are new molecules. They start with morphine and they say, can we make this better? Right? And the other thing we learned is that things like cannabinoids, for example, in the cannabinoid industry, have some interesting effects, but are they really great as pharmaceuticals? We have yet to see that, right? We have yet to see them become pharmaceuticals, and it's very hard to commercialize that natural molecule for a number of reasons. But if you've got a new molecule, now you have a real opportunity to make it better and to actually be successful in commercializing. So that's what this is all these things that we've learned and we're now applying in this company. Let's make what the industry needs, right? These psychedelic based molecules, they're really cool, right? From a pharmaceutical point of view, the things that they do, they bind to these serotonin receptors, the 5-HT receptors, and they have all kinds of really amazing effects. And you think, wow, if only we could make that commercializable, if only we could make that better, just think of the positive impact we could have on human health, right? It's so exciting. So that's what we're trying to do, is we recognize that little area that I described, this synthetic biology, bioconversion, and chemistry combination to make new molecules, that's what we can do. And I think that's what we can do better than anybody else. And so that's all we're doing, right? We're going to do what we're the best at, what we're really good at, and create this library, this vast portfolio of molecules for everybody else, right? We want the industry to succeed. We want all these other companies to succeed. We want everybody to take a molecule and turn it into the best damn drug that's ever been out there. So that's what we're doing at MagicMed.
Yeah, that's really amazing. That's really cool. You talk about that juxtaposition of synthetic biology and combinatorial chemistry, and it's been really fascinating just following the process, learning more about it, and writing blogs about it. I mean, I love doing that, So I know you touched a little bit. You mentioned the library and these partnerships, that you guys, these strategic partnerships that are going to be helping you see these molecules through the drug development process, and that's a big part of your strategy. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about these partnerships and where you see MagicMed heading with that in the future.
Sure, great. And again, this is driven in large part by our experience, doing this in the past. We've had partnerships like this in the past with big biotech companies on other high-value plant-derived molecules. And, what we've learned along the way is, a couple of important things. First off, if you have several partners, you have all these individual options that, may succeed, right? So many different molecules, no one company can carry them forward. And they're in different arenas too, right? The psychedelic space, you see molecules maybe for addiction, you see molecules for anxiety and depression, you see a number of different places that you can go with this. And so you really can't, nobody can do that all themselves, not even us, as great as we are. So you really need to work with other people and other folks who can really make a big commitment to that. So first off, we recognize that to maximally impact human health, to maximally benefit this sector, we need to work with as many others as we can. And it's enabling for them as well as, a successful strategy for us. So first off, diversity of partners is a really big thing for us. And again, we're enablers, right? We don't want to compete with anybody else. We want to help everybody run ahead. So, the way our relationships work, exactly how we've done in the past successfully, and that is like, because we know we're just doing this development stage, we don't have the same kind of overhead that so many other companies do, right? If we were taking one of these molecules all the way through clinical trials, man, that's expensive. That's a lot of work, right? And it's a lot of risk. And my hat is off to the people that do it. It's a heck of a challenge. I have done it before, and wow, it's a lot of risk and it's a lot of money, and good for you for being so, brave, I guess, to go and do it. So with companies like that, with each one, we say, look, we know that our expenses are lower, relatively speaking, than yours. So all we are looking for is we have some research work that's taking place on your behalf. We're building this molecule for you. We just want you to cover that. Cover our research costs, a little bit of overhead, and that's our relationship. So we go through this process doing that, and when we find a molecule through a back and forth iterative process, and I can't emphasize enough how important that is. We want to work with the company and say, what is it that what are you finding? Here's what we're finding. Let's pool our resources. Let's, as we do experiments, say with new molecules, and we say, this one is binding really well to the receptor, or we say this change improves the solubility or bioavailability, or what have you, right? All these pharmaceutical concerns. As we iterate, we'll get at some point to a molecule where the partner says, this is fabulous. This is the molecule we want. We found it. Let's go. And we'll say, great. Our work here is done. Here you go. And actually, it's not quite that easy, because as the manufacturing proceeds, we'll help them build out the manufacturing. We'll probably help with some of the preclinical validation type work that you need to do. But ultimately, they then carry it forward. And as that molecule goes forward, as they hit important milestones, they enter clinical trials, they complete a phase 2. They look back and remember us. Oh, I remember MagicMed. You guys really helped out. Thanks. Here's a milestone payment for this great molecule that we developed together. And in the future, when that molecule goes on the market and it becomes a $1 billion product, again, oh yes, I remember MagicMed. Here's a royalty. Thanks very much. So that's what the relationship looks like individually, and also we have that with multiple different partners.
Wow, that's really phenomenal. When I was getting my master's in biotechnology, we were talking about the drug development process. We talked about how it's an incredibly risky, thing to take on yourself. 1 in 10 drugs make it, and it costs on average $1 billion a drug, so you got to recoup all those losses. So the way that you guys are structured, it really offers a really unique opportunity to de-risk and partner with a lot of people in the space. And I think that's really exciting. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about combinatorial chemistry, because I know in the past, especially when this first kind of debuted into the scientific world, the drug development world, it received a lot of criticism because it seemed that intentional drug design was more efficacious in the end, and not a lot of products came from the combinatorial pathway. So how are you guys positioning combinatorial chemistry to benefit you and kind of assessing or assuaging some of those doubts that some people might have?
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right that combinatorial chemistry has received from time to time some disapproval in certain contexts, and I think combinatorial chemistry, like synthetic biology, which has similarly been heralded as the panacea. This is this amazing new technology. It's going to change the world, and we're going to cure everything. We've been hearing that with synthetic biology. I think we heard that 20 years ago when the human genome was fully sequenced, and they said, wow, now we know everything. We're all going to be cured, death. We're going to cure death now. We know the whole thing. And so I think combinatorial chemistry is like these others, both since and prior. It's a tool. It's a tool that can create certain things, but it can, it's limited in what it can really do. And I think, there was a lot of hype about combinatorial chemistry, but the reality is you're limited by chemistry. There's only some things that will work well. And so this is why we're combining it with synthetic biology to do things that it can't do, so that you broaden what you're able to actually achieve first. And then I think the second thing also has to do with intent. How are you using this tool? Right. And I think that's a very important thing to think about. If combinatorial chemistry is being used only as a tool to get around somebody else's patent, which I think there was a lot of that in the early days. Yeah. Here's this great statin drug that's making $10 billion a year. Let's use some combinatorial chemistry, make a new molecule that works about the same, maybe a smidge better. But because it's a new molecule, we can file a patent on that, and we can develop another drug and try to make $10 billion a year. But ultimately, what's the improvement? Is it a 1% or 2% improvement? So, if that's the intent of your use of combinatorial chemistry, and I think there was a fair bit of that in the pharma industry when it first came out, then yeah, your tool works, your outcome is successful, you managed to get a new patented molecule, but it really didn't make the world that much of a better thing. So I think it's all about your intent, right? It's just a tool for us, where I see a really big need here, right? I'm moving to this tool. We are moving to this tool because, we've seen anecdotally, and now we're seeing more and more clinical data that these psychedelic molecules have profound beneficial impacts, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing the anxiety and depression, the suicide ideation, the addiction. These are not immaterial things. These are big problems in the society that could really stand better treatment. And I really do believe that these molecules, however, are limited in how far we will be able to use them in society because of the current side effects that they have. Because they're so potent, and I think people are trying to find ways. The whole idea of microdosing is to try to find a way around that. Can we get the benefit?
Right.
And so microdosing is very interesting to me. That what they're trying to do there is, and it's a classic pharmacology concept of the therapeutic index, right? If you get dose this high, it works, and if you go this high, it's toxic. And what you want is the biggest possible therapeutic index. And so, what's going on with the natural compounds is people are doing essentially experimentation and saying, can we manage this therapeutic index? Can we get benefit without side effects? But, as it stands right now, I don't think it's clear that that's definitely going to work. But with combinatorial chemistry and synthetic biology, which, again, they're just tools. So the way I would like to say it is, with a whole new library, a whole new portfolio of new molecules, perhaps in that portfolio, and you have to imagine that just sort of law of averages, we're working on a few molecules right now and they have these profound effects, but if you make 10,000 variants, something in there has got to be substantially better than what we're doing right now. And that's the whole idea here, right? If we can make molecules, I don't mean we MagicMed, I mean we the industry, if we can make some molecules that are better to the point that it can be pharmaceuticalized, that you don't have to take them under the constraints that you have to take them now, then you can really get molecules out there, drugs out there to a large portion of society. And that's what our goal here is, right? Is to have as large as possible a positive impact on society. And I think that the new molecules gives you the opportunity to do that.
That's amazing. I'm glad you mentioned microdosing. I read a really interesting, I think it was from someone at Heaven Life, maybe, but they wrote about microdosing and how the dosage is so low, but the reported and anecdotal effects seem to be so profound that one of the mechanisms proposed was that, the majority of our serotonin receptors are in our gut. So it actually talked about, and I'm sure this has maybe more to do with something like psilocybin that you consume orally in an appreciable quantity, that it could modulate mood and your neurotransmitters through the gut-brain axis. Which is one potential, mechanism for how and why microdosing is so effective. So I'm definitely interested to see more clinical trials and research trying to uncover that pathway. And I bring this up because the question that came to mind is, what are some of the improvements you're trying to make? And obviously one of them is trying to reduce the hallucinatory effects. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that. Like, I know psilocybin is one of the initial focuses of your library. So what are some improvements that you're looking to make? And then the next question is going to be, because I have to ask you this, do you believe that trying to remove the hallucinatory or mystical component from these compounds could possibly detract from some of the profound shifts in consciousness and just belief structures people with depression or addiction have, because a large school of thought definitely attributes that psychedelic hallucination experience to the therapeutic benefits, but then obviously microdosing presents this other argument, right? So
right.
I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about
right.
that.
No, actually, I love that you asked this question. I mean, this is one of the most interesting questions that's central to this entire industry.
Yeah.
And what I love about this time we're in, it's a super exciting time. You're starting to see things like the Minister of Health in Canada granting exemptions for
right.
people to take psilocybin, and you're starting to see decriminalization. I won't say legalization, but decriminalization. And you're starting to see all these renowned institutions around the world now starting to perform clinical trials. Right. And so, and I think that this is getting to, the core of the question, which is nobody knows. Yeah. Right. You're asking me my opinion, but I'm a scientist, right? When you ask a scientist his opinion, he'll only tell you what he knows. Right. And everything else is like, nobody knows. And I think that's exactly the situation right now, is nobody knows. You see this experimentation going on in microdosing, and to date, it's not been what a scientist would call a well-controlled trial. It's anecdotal data, and all of the experiences. Certainly, I've interviewed a number of we'll call them clinicians that are even licensed to administer, for example, in Brazil and other countries, to administer these kinds of treatments. And yeah, many of them swear up and down that the hallucinatory part of it is an essential element to the this huge mind shift, perception shift that takes place. And yeah, the argument's been made that one or two, three kind of events like that with the right therapy and the right dose, and you're cured, or you've got a life-altering event. And I've had conversations with people who've expressed that, and yet microdosing, right? And so what our problem here, and you nailed it, is we don't have enough data. I'm the scientist, right? I'm not the guy that'll blow smoke up your skirt. We don't have enough data. And what's so exciting to me right now is this opening up, this allowing now of testing, and not just, anecdotal, I'll pop a shroom and see what it does, but actually well-controlled, testing with keeping track of everything and under the right conditions, and well-regarded scientists at well-regarded institutions. I think that, I don't know the answer, right? That all we have is anecdotal data, and there's strong anecdotal data on completely opposite sides of the fence here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer, but, and I think anybody who tells you they do know the answer is lying, because we don't have the data.
You're right.
We can have opinions, but as a scientist, my opinion is, I don't know. I need to see what the data tells me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what's really cool then is I foresee that there's maybe a possibility for these natural derived or the traditional psychedelic compounds maybe to be used in a clinical therapeutic setting, not at home. And then these microdose derivative formulations that you guys, are helping create could be something that a patient could pick up at the pharmacy and use safely, in their day-to-day lives. And that way we could have a paradigm that maybe accommodates for both, and the people that do want to seek out kind of like the full-blown experience in a safe place, because it's a really important element to all of this, can do that and then benefit from your compounds kind of maybe on a more daily basis or a maintenance basis. Is that maybe how you see it too?
Yeah, I will join you in your speculation that seems like a plausible way that this could go, in particular because the natural compounds are so much further ahead. And they're, we saw Compass, they're doing their IPO today, I think, actually. Yes. these companies are so much further ahead, and the new molecules are really going to they're going to have to go through the whole classical drug development process. So even if we already have the greatest molecule ever created sitting in a test tube in our lab right now, it'll be 10 to 12 years before that sees the light of day. So I think there's a lot of runway here for companies that are using the natural compounds, the natural molecules, to actually establish benefit as we continue to see decriminalization and destigmatization, which I think is also an important benefit that we're seeing right now. As we see all of that happen, I think, it's absolutely possible that there could be, again, we're speculating, but I'll join you, that there could be a role, a niche for clinics with a more potent experience, and then as well this maybe more dilute experience, but which is something which is again more amenable to home administration.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. One of the things I thought about just now is safety of these compounds. Like you said, the traditional psychedelic compounds have been used for quite some time, and a lot of their safety is pretty established, minus maybe some effects of drugs like ibogaine. For the most part, like psilocybin, compounds like that are pretty safe, LSD. My question to you is, I think when they were creating synthetic cannabinoid drugs, the assumption was cannabis is safe and has this incredibly high therapeutic index. So we can just mess with the endocannabinoid system, creating synthetic cannabinoids, and those will be just as safe. And we found that to be very untrue. There have been some synthetic cannabinoids, both obviously on the recreational side with spice and all that are incredibly dangerous, but even some pharmaceutical developments of cannabinoid drugs that ended up causing brain damage, even death, and I think that's another reason why that industry hasn't really expanded too far, is because that was not able to translate, cleanly. So how are we going to approach, especially making psychedelic derivatives of these compounds that we know are safe? How are we going to, make sure we don't run into that same problem with these psychedelic ones?
Yeah. So you said a couple of really important things there. You started by saying that a lot of the psychedelics the safety is well established, and I would agree with you. A lot of them are arguably pretty safe compounds in terms of when you're talking to a pharmacology type guy like myself. You use words like toxicity, and it means different things to different people, right? So hallucination is kind of toxicity, although it's not the same thing as makes your lungs stop working, which is a whole different kind of toxicity. But yeah, I agree. From a safety point of view, they're fairly well established. I won't go so far as to say benign, not at all, but definitely, for example, opiates, very often much more dangerous, very easy to kill yourself by taking too much in the way of opiates. No question about it. Right. And so from a safety point of view, I agree that the naturals have a better profile than some other molecules out there. Now, with regards to the cannabinoids, I think there were several lessons there. And actually, I think this is also true of the opiates. There were several lessons there to be learned. People got excited about the idea of synthetics, and synthetics. There's again, people use that word kind of in a loose fashion. Sometimes when somebody says a synthetic cannabinoid, what they mean is a totally artificial molecule, completely unrelated, but happens to hit the receptor. That is totally different from synthesizing the actual natural molecule in a different manufacturing system, right? But so people will say synthetic CBD, meaning it was made in some way other than being extracted out of a plant, but that molecule is the same. Right. So it's important to draw those distinctions. What are you talking about when you say synthetic? But I'm assuming you're talking about things like making different molecules. So the rare
Right.
cannabinoids, the things like THCV that people are interested in, but know very little about because it's been so rare. I think, as you said, there wasn't this immediate, wow, we just have one variant and test it and it's magical and this is a multi-billion-dollar drug. And this next variant, even if these are natural compounds but rare, is also a multi-billion-dollar drug. And so I think there was some optimism, enthusiasm that something like that the magical cannabis plant, every single molecule out of it would make you $1 billion.
Right.
And I think that the reality is, no, it's not that simple. And this is why, again, this is what's leading us to doing what we're doing, which is to say we're making many, many, many variants, hundreds or thousands of variants. A lot of those are going to be bad, really bad. You don't want them. A lot of them aren't going to do anything at all. But our hope is that in that large pool, there will be some that are great. There will be some that have the positive that you want and don't have the negative, right? And that is really the idea behind making this large pool, because we've seen before. Again, I'll go back to opiates, right? Opiates were really constrained in what you could do with chemistry to them. You had to, because the molecule is such a complicated molecule, you had to start with this molecule that had already been through 15 steps or 20 steps within the plant, take this big complicated molecule and say, what little things can I do to the outside of it? But I can't make any big changes without blowing the whole thing apart. And so, in opiates, they were really constrained to what they could do. And I think cannabinoids arrived just as synthetic biology was starting to maybe get there, right? But still, what we're seeing right now in the cannabinoid industry is mostly, let's use synthetic biology to make the things that the plant's already making. No one's really, to my knowledge, gone and said, let's make 1,000 new molecules that look like cannabinoids but are different. Not 2 molecules or 4 molecules, 1,000, 10,000, right? Because if you're going to find the best molecule, you need a big pool, because a lot of them aren't going to be what you're wanting. And that's, I think, the mistake that happened with cannabinoids, right? You say, CBD is so great, so every one of these other molecules, they got to be so great too, right? There's no reason to expect that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
There's no scientific reason to expect that. And
Right.
that's what drives me, right? Prove it.
Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. I would love to, there's been a lot of really exciting research going on in this space right now. And of course, we've talked a lot about things like mental health and how it can help with depression and addiction. But it looks like these compounds might even be able to be helpful for things like pain and chronic pain. I just recently saw, I think it was a study, the first microdosing LSD study, that found it to be as effective as opiates, which is so surprising, especially since, psychedelics are often referred to as non-specific amplifiers. So I always found it so fascinating, when they're using these psychedelic compounds in someone with terminal cancer. Like, I can't imagine tripping on mushrooms when I'm dying of cancer, because I'm in so much pain and I'm probably in so much discomfort. And the fear then is I'm going to be in the psychedelic trip that's amplifying all of these sensations, but they seem to come out of it in a much better place. So maybe there are other mechanisms. There's probably so many mechanisms we don't know about besides just its effects on serotonin and our perception of our reality, but it also seems to affect our perception of pain and other physiological processes as well. So if you could comment a little bit on that and what
Sure.
your interests are in the research space moving forward, that would be really exciting for all of us.
Yeah, well, and as I said, I've been mostly working in the brain health and mental health field, but from a pharmaceutical point of view, it's mostly what I've been doing for my career. And I probably a big part of the reason I do it is I love challenges. I love taking on stuff that seems like a huge hill to climb. I'm crazy that way. Right. And I think the brain is still that last great black box. right? We really don't know what's going on in there. We try so much. There's different, and it's things like how do you separate the physical from the mental, right? Pain is definitely physical, but there's absolutely, I don't want to say the word mental, but for lack of a better word, mental components to it, where it's cognition and perception as well as the physical, right? And so, man, how do you tease these things apart? So, of course, I've seen, cannabinoids are going to be the next opiate. And ephedra and psychedelics and all these different things, and it's so tricky to try to say, you're changing perception. So are you really changing the pain, or are you changing somebody's recollection perception, or right, what they focused on? And how do you really separate that from pain anyway, when you're talking about pain in the brain? How do you so I mean, I love this space, right? Because it's this total black box, and all this exciting work is happening. And every time you see an opening up and even more exciting work, and that's what's been so exciting in this field the last few years with, now cannabinoids, now psychedelics being areas which were completely taboo for decades and decades. And now, lots of smart people are saying, let's actually study this in a scientific fashion. Let's unravel this mystery. So, could all or any of these different approaches work? Sure, could. It really could. I think when, one of the advantages to something which is definitely hitting, for example, on the opiates and the mu receptor, that is, absolutely shutting off physical functions, as opposed to, say, dissociating. And I think, ketamine is like that, right? It's more of a dissociation, as is laughing gas. You ever had laughing gas when you go into the dentist? It's not that you don't feel the pain. It's that you're here, your pain's over there, and you're like, that pain's pretty funny. Look at that. That would really hurt if that was me. And it's kind of like that, right? So, yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen. I think ultimately the true test is, can somebody come in, describe their symptom, and somebody can say, a trained clinician or whomever can say, take this. This will solve your particular problem, right? And so the diagnosis part of what's at the cause of this pain is maybe just as important as the treatment that you then correlate with it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I was listening to a talk by Stephen Hayes and Ruth Chun at the last Psychedelic Capital event. And, he was talking about how in the future is this possibility that all healthcare maybe stems from, someone's mental health care provider, because these psychedelic compounds are starting. He was of the mindset that it all starts in the brain, and so it was really fascinating. You talked a little bit about stigma, and us having these conversations is definitely the first step and the biggest step that's being taken to reduce that. The thing with that is, as stigma goes down, demand is increasing. But the supply is not able at the moment to keep up with the demand, which is a good point he brought up. We're not able to train clinicians and therapists fast enough. And then, so what happens is the cost gets really driven up then, and this really amazing medicine becomes a little bit less accessible for people. So just, an industry outlook kind of point of talking, what are your thoughts on that, and how can we expand the supply and keep this medicine accessible to the people we need it? And right now, ketamine fusion therapy, for example, it's pretty expensive. It's not really covered by insurance. So how do you see the future of psychedelic therapy, and how do you see it, or how would you like to see it, in a way that it reaches the most people and benefits the most people?
Yeah. Complicated socioeconomic question there.
It's easy for me to ask that, but
yeah. Well, so maybe in a way I'll give in some regards a simple answer. And the simple answer is, based on my experience and my sort of my position within the industry, within the drug development industry, which is, it's a capitalist industry, right? It's and the reason, largely, there are some notable exceptions, and I applaud them, like MAPS and USONA. Absolutely applaud what they're trying to do, but largely it's a capitalist industry, which means it's driven by dollars, and that as my stepfather used to say, sarcastically, industry rushing to meet the needs of society. Of course, he always said it sarcastically, but the idea is, if there is a need, if there is a gap, people will find a way. If there are disparities in serving needs, the cost is too high, that invisible hand, Adam Smith or whoever it was, invisible hand, does tend to step in eventually, right? There are always, temporary disparities in the situation, frictions, but they tend to resolve themselves. So, as there is a large need for these, society is recognizing it, right? We're all recognizing, from the opiate crisis to depression being rampant in our society. We recognize it, and we're applying pressure on the government to give exemptions and to decriminalize. And we're providing incentive to the industry to go out and make better products. We will buy those products. There's a demand for those products. And, so that you do have I applaud groups like MAPS and USONA for saying, to the extent that this should not be patented, that this should be accessible to everybody at low cost, to the extent that that is the case, and we'll, like any society, we'll push the boundaries while other people are pushing the boundaries in the other direction, and we'll arrive at a détente somewhere, and this will be appropriate. You have, in the industry, I've seen now 4 or 5 or maybe more companies that are rushing to fill the need of manufacturing. They're saying, we're going to do it through extraction, we're going to synthesize it in bacteria, we're going to synthesize it in yeast, we're going to chemically synthesize. So the need is recognized. People are rushing to fill that need and say, we're going to make this molecule, and to the extent it gets approved in a fashion that doesn't require everybody to have to go through one particular company, you will have multiple sources driving the price down, right? You will have the education. Yes, there will be short-term, frictions, inefficiencies, as you have to spool up and teach up your next crop of physicians. But the good thing is the new up-and-coming physicians they're all the younger, more open, dare I say, millennial, more interested in the cutting edge and what's new, and less concerned about stodgy old stuff like me. And so, I think that they will, as quickly as can reasonably be expected, come up. But the destigmatization is a great boon to that as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. One of the final questions while getting towards the end here, I wanted to ask you is, a lot of these compounds are still in Schedule 1. So how are you maneuvering your operations? How are investors? How are people getting involved is a question a lot of people have right now. How is this space becoming, increasing in size, and it's becoming more dynamic when these are still kind of legislatively locked in this restrictive scheduling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, I don't know how much that will change. I mean, we did see pretty significant changes with cannabis, right, in terms of their regulation. And so, we could see that. It does look, and that's why the whole Minister of Health again, who I, kudos to her. The whole Minister of Health exemption thing kind of said, we might be going down that same path, which would make a lot of things easier. But, everything takes time, even if we are going down that path. So in the interim, and it's been good this last 7 or so years that I've been working very much in this scheduled drug field, where these, working with opiates, working with cannabinoids, working with ephedra, working with all these molecules. I'm I guess comfortable with what's going on in terms of, from the regulatory point of view, and agencies like Health Canada, the DEA, are also trying to, how do we do this? We these known molecules, we know what we think. Of course, the data that underpins how we're treating it is changing under our feet. And so, that's how things change down the road. But new molecules, that's what is this? And, a lot of the time, nobody knows. You make a new molecule. So, one of the funny things is you look at, say, tryptophan, is amino acid. You get a lot of tryptophan in turkey at Christmas dinner and pass out, right? So tryptophan and tryptamine are really, really close.
Right.
Really close. And one of them is oogly boogly, and the other one is we're taking it to help us go to sleep, and it's in our bodies. And so when you have new molecules that are somewhere between those, what are those? If you have a new molecule and you've never tested it, you don't even know. Is it tryptophan or tryptamine? Nobody knows. So I understand absolutely where the regulatory agencies are coming from, what they're trying to protect, and I fully, support everything that they're saying. But there is this whole kind of a gray area. How do you deal with it? And it's a great question. So, companies right now are applying for licensing and getting the permission. But even then, you apply for a license for the molecule that is known. How do you apply for a molecule that doesn't exist yet, right? That's a different kind of a question. So our approach for years in the variety of projects we've worked on is to be very closely associated with highly regarded institutions, academic institutions, where the institution and the professors at those institutions have been working on these molecules for decades and decades, and they have the licenses from the government, and the government says, I know that this person, they've been doing this for 30 years. We're good. They check them every year. They've got to keep their license up to date, but they know what's going on. So anything that we do that is potentially in the gray zone, that we make sure that it happens there, that it happens under those auspices. It's all appropriately licensed, and that's how we we don't want to get into any gray zones ourselves. We're extra cautious about that. So anything that's potentially questionable, we make sure that it happens under the right licensing at an academic organization. And that's an approach I think that works. I think it works well. I encourage other companies to do the same thing. The last thing we need is people to be playing in the gray zone and give the industry a black eye. That would be just unnecessary. Yeah. But anyway, I think most people are very, very cognizant of what the rules are and are paying close attention to always staying on the right side. I like to believe that anyway.
Yeah, me too. Especially this time around. I think people understand how high the stakes are after what happened in the 60s and the 70s. There's so much to be gained by exploring these compounds, not just at therapeutic value, but we briefly talked about how they're giving us so much more insight into the human brain and just understanding how that works, and how important that is just for all of us, So I'm definitely very hopeful to see this revolution and renaissance continue. And it's been such a pleasure speaking with you and collaborating with MagicMed Industries. I would love to just give you the final word. To give our audience a little bit of a message about your contribution to psychedelic science and what you're most excited about moving forward.
Well, so thanks for that. The final word, I guess, honestly, like you said, I too am very excited about what we're seeing right now. This opening up, this ability now to really start to gather true data, right? And that's what I think as we build our knowledge base with clinical and non-clinical data and start to use that to really try to address some of these major issues that continue to beset us as humans. I mean, it's so exciting. And what I guess my word for the listeners is, these things, they look like real drugs. They look like they have real possibility. And so to the extent that anybody can support entrance in the industry, all the companies in the industry that are fighting the good fight, trying to take it forward, do so, right? Let's all enable each other, and then hopefully we'll end up with some really fantastic, improvements, benefits for human health. That's what I'd like to see, and to the extent that everybody can play a role in that, I think that'd be wonderful.
Oh, that's really awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Joseph Tucker. This has been a really engaging and an amazing conversation, as I knew it would be. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us in this first episode of the PsyFi podcast. And I look forward to our next discussion and our next episode. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for joining the Psy-Fi series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.